guys, welcome to week 24. Actually, it's week 23. Well, welcome to week 23 of Viva's, and today we have a very timely Viva, and it is how did Black Death impact European society? Today, in this age, we are living through a pandemic unlike anything we have ever seen. And right now, we're going to be talking about a very deadly pandemic that killed half of the population of Europe. Dog doesn't like me. What can I say? Not a dog person. Anyway, yes, the Black Death killed almost half of the population of Europe. And although we often tend to focus on the Black Death's ramifications on the health of medieval populations, the impact of this pandemic go far beyond killing a half of the population. This Black Death remade society forever. More than a pandemic, Black Death transformed European culture in numerous fundamental ways. So it transformed culture medically, economically, and socio-politically. So before we get into this, let's squash a few misconceptions about the Black Death, starting with a little nursery rhyme. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ring Around the Rosie and how it's connected to the Black Death, but that is false. That's not true. Black Death has nothing to do with this nursery rhyme. It originated in 1800s, not from the Black Death. Okay, that's one. And then number two, Black Death was not named because the disease blackened flesh of its victims. This is just completely a myth, and the Black Death got its name because it was so deadly and dark and evil. So, now that we have that out of the way, we can talk about the fact that the Black Death influenced change in medical, economic, and socio-political ways. Feudalism declined and Renaissance emerged in the wake of the Black Death. Today's pandemic that we're dealing with, we can learn a lot from the Black Death that we can not necessarily apply to what we're going through today, but that we can learn from and maybe take example from how much it changed a society. So first, let's talk about how the Black Death impacted the health of Europeans. So it's pretty obvious that a pandemic has impact on one's health or on a society's health, but it's not just the physical health of Europeans that was transformed. It was the mental health of Europeans. It impacted European genes, it impacted population growth, and it impacted their view on medicine. So it's pretty obvious that during a pandemic with less people aren't going to settle down and have kids. So population decreased. Hey, Anna?
Yeah?
I'm filming, so can you be quiet?
Sure.
Okay, I'm not starting again, so it's fine if there's background noise. So, I don't know what I was saying. Oh, yes. Okay, so Black Death arrives in Europe around 1348, and in just 2 years, in 1350, it had killed nearly half of Europe's population. In just 2 years, from 1348 to 1350. And this disease didn't leave after 2 years. It came back sporadically in waves till about the 18th century. Since there was almost half of the population gone, survivors of this pandemic were thrown into despair, depression, and doubt. as it would be pretty obvious, they've survived a lot, and so they're going to respond in a way. They've been damaged, and they have been hurt by this pandemic, so they're going to respond to it. And so during this aftermath of the Black Death, there was a mood of morbidness and of pessimism, and PTSD was common. Also, the relationship with God changed. William Langland says, quote, "God is deaf nowadays and will not hear us, and for our guilt he grinds good men to dust." So we can see this anger at God from William Langstand, and we can also see this piety which people turn to. People turn to God because they needed comfort in this time, and they needed something that they could hold on to that is everlasting and is comforting to them. But another response that people had was turning to pleasure. People wanted to escape this tragedy, and they did this through just pleasure. So Jean de Venette saw the impact of the disease on Europe, and we get an account from Florence that talks about just the sheer amount of death there was. It says, quote, "Dug for each graveyard a huge trench in which they laid the corpses as they arrived by the hundreds at a time, piling them up tier upon tier as merchandise is stowed onto a ship." There was just this massive amount of dead bodies, and there was a lot of mental effect on Europeans, and there was also a change in European medicine and health. So the plague hit hard and it hit fast. Jean de Venette says that a victim, quote, "he who was well one day was dead the next and being carried into his grave." With so many dead bodies everywhere, people began to think about anatomical investigations and actually studying the human body and learning from it. And also, as is pretty obvious, the need for surgeons became evident during this time. And some people think that this genetic mutation came in the generations after the plague. This genetic mutation is called CCR5-32, and it is a mutation which gives people of European descent immunity from diseases like smallpox, HIV, and the plague. And this mutation, people think, is from the Black Death. The descendants of these people had built up immunity, and yeah, so that's pretty interesting. It changed the genetics of Europeans. And what's interesting about this is that when people came to colonize the Americas, Europeans spread all these diseases that killed so many Americans, like the smallpox and all these things, because they had this immunity that the Americans didn't, and they killed so many people. And this all stems from the Black Plague, the Black Death. So yeah, firstly, we talked about it changed Europeans' health. And then secondly, the Black Death transformed the economy. It increased wages, it changed the approach to agriculture, and it allowed Europe to return to unfarmed forests. Anyway, so killing nearly half of the population. We keep coming back to this, but it is super important. The fact that there was so much less people was a good thing for laborers because laborers could get increased wages. There was a demand for labor, and there was a shortage in labor, so they could ask for more money. They were now more valuable. In time before the Black Death, workers were kind of dispensable, and because of the feudal system and the large population, it kept people from wages rising or from change occurring. But with so much less people, workers could ask for more money, and their lords would have to were forced to comply with their requests, or they would have no workers. Also, what they produced changed. So agriculture changed. People began to use sheep more instead of grain, because grain took a lot more workers to harvest than sheep did. And as people's wages increased, they spent more money on vegetables and fruit and on clothing, and so production of these things increased. So the agriculture of Europe changed, and then the third thing that changed in the economy was the forests. Forest which had been cultivated and deforested before the Black Death. The process of deforesting reversed, and suddenly there was all this unfarmed land in Europe because all the farmers had died. So the landscape kind of changed, which is interesting because today we're kind of seeing a similar thing with the coronavirus. The pollution in China is down. We can see this in the satellite pictures. If you look at Venice, and if you've looked at the pictures of it, you can see clear water, you can see fish, you can see swans, and you can see like dolphins, which they say they haven't seen in the canals for like 60 years, which is pretty cool. So it's changing the pollution right now, today, which is kind of crazy, and we don't even know what the other impacts are going to be of today's pandemic. But we're looking at the past. We're seeing, first we saw the health impacts Black Death had. Second, we saw the economic impacts. And Leonard Curie says about the second point, he says that the economy underwent abrupt and extreme inflation, and the social and economic structure of Europe drastically changed. So that's my quote. Didn't forget my quote, Sarah. Then thirdly, the Black Death changed Europe's social and political culture. So there was anti-Semitic attacks after the Black Death, and there was an end in serfdom's dominance. So let's talk about this sad thing that happened after the Black Death. So a lot of Europeans began to blame Jews for the plague. They said that Jews were responsible for this because Jews had been scapegoats in this whole thing. And that is probably due to a few things about the Jewish culture in this time. Jewish people followed very strict dietary rules and a lot more hygienic practices than the common medieval person would have followed, and they also lived in social isolation more, so they stayed in the ghettos, and so they escaped a lot of the plague, and so Europeans blamed them and became angry at them. In 1351, 60 major and 150 smaller Jewish communities were destroyed by angry Europeans who blamed blamed the Jews for this pandemic, which is completely really sad. But that is one of the socio-political changes that happened. And then serfdom and the manorial system, it kind of fell apart. As we talked about before this point, there was a lot less workers, and so the workers had more power in the society, and lords didn't have as much power. So the serfdom declined. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so basically a lot of things happened from the Black Plague. And one example that we have of this socio-political change is the Medici family rose to importance. They were from a rural area in Tuscany, and they moved to Florence shortly after the plague. And they rose from the wool trade to banking, and became patrons of really famous artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo. I think it's Michelangelo. But anyway, they became a really powerful family of the Renaissance and of Florence. And Louisa Woodville says that, quote, "Would such mobility have been possible without the social and economic upheaval caused by the Black Death?" End quote. So, this dog is hilarious. Sorry. So anyway, people like the Medici family rose to power, which they probably would have never done if it had not been for this plague. So, as we can see, I'm gonna wake the dog. It hates me. Anyway, the Black Death had an impact on European society. It impacted it medically, economically, and socio-politically. Right, Miles? Miles, stop it. Anyway, guys, stay safe out there. Don't go outside unless you really need to. Chipotle delivers now. Free delivery. You can get a burrito bowl if you really want one, so you don't have to go out. Just stay inside, stay safe. If it's not for you, do it for other people. Anyway, I don't know. Just stay sane, I guess. And learn from Black Death. And I'm so sorry. I'm literally so sorry for this 18-minute video. I can't help it. I haven't talked to anyone in like 7 days except for my family, so go crazy. Just kidding, I'm fine. I'm really fine. But anyway, seriously guys, stay safe, stay healthy, drink some tea. Drink some tea, get some rest, have a good time with your family, and get your homework done. This is Hope James. Goodbye.